Oki, nistueno itzinotspiaki, nitziganaki. Hello, Oki. I would like to welcome you to the Indigenous History Program with the Galt Museum and Archives. Today, our session is on Blackfoot women. I'm going to be talking about the traditional roles of the Blackfoot women before contact, as well as talking about contemporary issues that affect the Blackfoot women even today. So I will get started with that. Today, we will be learning about the Blackfoot women's traditional roles and responsibilities. I will also teach about the extended family system and the roles of women during the nomadic times to current issues, all the way to today's contemporary issues that affect the Blackfoot women. Women were basic to the functioning of the economic system of the tribe, as well as with the clan family system. They enjoyed the rights of wealth and could own and inherit property. They were owners of horses and were well known to be established horsewomen. They owned rightfully the teepee lodge that housed the family. With contact, the social and family order of the Blackfoot changed, and this affected the Blackfoot women's roles and responsibilities. Residential schools affected parenting as children were taken from their families, and women were affected as they were no longer with their children. The devastating impact of residential school harmed the social fabric of Blackfoot communities, damaging family systems and collapsing the clan systems. Colonization and assimilation changed the role of women. The adopted perceptions of the mainstream were prevalent. The Indian Act cemented the role of women as being lower status than the men. Women were no longer recognized as being property owners and being equals to their male counterparts. So I will talk about Iskotsi long ago and the traditional lifestyles of the Blackfoot. The lifestyle of the Blackfoot women before contact consisted of being the keeper and owner of the lodge, the parent and medicine person for the family. There were roles and responsibilities that women carried out as well, that being of a property owner of horses, medicine bundles, and teepee lodges. Spiritual roles were extremely significant for the women, as they were important to the carrying out of the ceremonies. The most sacred Akugatsisin Ugant Lodge was sponsored by a woman, and there are other ceremonies that need the assistance of the women for it to be carried out. The Blackfeet women were the owners and keepers of their homes. They prepared the hides to make the teepee lodges and were responsible for transporting the lodge from place to place. The travois was used as the moving vehicle, and the teepee poles and lodges set on it. Teepee designs are family owned, and family would pass and get the transfer rights to that design. Besides cooking and cleaning, a Blackfoot woman took pride in her family lodge and would equip it well with bedding and furniture made from natural material. In the warmer weather, women spent more time preparing buffalo, deer, and elk hides. It was easier to do this work in the warm seasons than the winter. Cleaning and tanning hides took a long time. It was difficult work and required a lot of skill and patience. Women often worked together, making it a social occasion. Women were always working with the hides, preparing them and making clothing or teepee covers. They were also responsible for making the clothing for their families, and they made the cloths out of hides as well, the clothes out of hides as well. Usually in the winter time was spent making new clothes. Women were proud of their skill at making and decorating them. Often designs were passed from one generation to the next in a family. There is often family designs with beadwork that has been passed from one generation to the next. With the nomadic lifestyle of the Blackfoot, the women were skilled at taking down their teepee lodges and setting them up in record time. A settler who lived with the Blackfoot in the late 1800s by the name of McClintock stated he saw the Blackfoot women set up their camp and it only took 15 minutes to set it up. He was impressed with what he saw. They would also use their travel to move from camp to camp and knew how to travel with their lodging and furnishings. These lodging and furnishings were replaced often. The Blackfoot women gathered the plants, roots, berries, and medicines for their families. The harvesting of the plants, berries, and roots took place in the spring, summer, and fall seasons. Each plant, root, or berries were carefully preserved by drying or making salves. The traditional knowledge of the gathering plants and medicines were passed down from generation to generation, as well as the skills for harvesting. They knew where the plants grew and would make their trips to the mountains, rivers, and other places to gather the plants and berries. Each Blackfoot person understands the protocols. Well, at least most Blackfoot people know and understand the protocols of harvesting from the earth. They make offerings of tobacco in exchange for taking the plants and berries. And even our hunters do that when they take a kill. I know some people still practice that today. The spiritual roles of the Blackfoot women. Beverly Hungry Wolf stated in her book, The Ways of My Grandmothers, that the Blackfoot ceremonies were given to the women, and the women shared with the men. In all our important ceremonies, women play an equal part in ceremonies as the men. Most ceremonies would not take place without the women. Usually it is the woman who is given the job of taking care of the medicine bundles. She is the one who smudges every morning and night for the bundles. In the ceremonies, there are specific songs that are sung for the women. Blackfoot women are also bestowed a major role in Blackfoot spiritual ways. The Ogan, which is the most significant ceremony, cannot happen without a woman. The woman is the central figure of this ceremony. The woman who hold the Ogan is a virtuous woman, faithful to her husband, and is seen as the grandmother or the mother of the nation. It's a very esteemed position, but also the woman is is considered to be very virtuous and humble. And it's not an easy job. It's a very dedicated. It requires a lot of dedication. Women can join sacred societies with their husbands or join the all-women society of the Motuki. As for other medicine bundles, a woman usually owns or keeps a medicine bundle with her husband or male partner. In Blackfoot spirituality, women are seen as equals, each with responsibilities. There is a balance of power and roles. Each understood the role expected of them in ceremony and the spiritual path they are on. Blackfoot women were responsible for raising their children, nieces and nephews and grandchildren. The extended family concept and practice was similar to the concept of a village raising a child. Not only were they raising their children, but they were on the move every day, taking care of their lodges and doing other tasks. It was a responsibility of the woman to raise hunters, warriors, and leaders. They had to help the rest of the family to prepare the young children to these roles. Children were taught at a young age serious responsibilities. They often followed around the adults to learn the skills necessary for survival. The old way of choosing our leaders began by considering the leadership potentials in that child who displayed such skills. It was the women who groomed them from birth. Women ensured the education of that child was conducted by the most skilled relatives and leaders. This type of leadership left nothing to chance. This child was groomed to manhood with the highest expectations to be a great leader. So those are the traditional roles of the Blackfoot women. And I will go on now to talk about the manly-hearted women, the warrior women. The research that I've done with this part came from some articles and a website, as well as talking with some elders in their knowledge of these Ninawakits. And I'm not sure if I'm saying that word, whether that describes manly-hearted women or manly woman. So I'm going to continue to use that term right now. So the Blackfoot warrior women were called manly-hearted women, or Ninawakits. From the website by Lewis, who was an anthropologist, she studied these manly-hearted women, and she stated that in her article that they hunted buffalo and went to war, and she said they were described as a warrior woman who was treated as a true leader. And this manly-hearted woman, or Ninawaki, was renowned for acts of bravery, such as going into an enemy's teepee and taking headdresses from behind the bed. And there's a story of one that would leave her leggings at the enemy camp. And then the enemy camp would know that she was there, and they would say, that woman has been here again. And then there is also another story of a warrior woman who would accompany the men on their war party, and she would always sleep alone. And away from the men's camp, she would sleep alone. And she would sleep, there's a story of her sleeping on top of a hill one time, and then she would sing a song. And then a vision or a message would come to her, and the next day she would know where to lead the party. So the men depended on her for this because she had that kind of medicine. So the stories of these manly-hearted women, they varied. The description of them varied, from what the elders have said, the stories that they've shared with me, or the articles that I've read. So it says they included that manly-hearted women. These they included married women. Some of them were married women, and they participated in manly activities with their husbands. The manly-hearted women of the Blackfoot excelled in feminine tasks and had the finest women's clothing. And at some, and they, like I mentioned, they were married and they had children. But they also developed or displayed characteristics classified as masculine. And they were aggressive, independent, and bold. The stories of the manly-hearted women, Ninawakits, illustrate the leadership skill and positions that the Blackfoot women had in their respective tribes. Maybe we can say today, and one elder said that some of them were known as two-spirited women. They didn't marry, and they had their own lodges. And so in today's terms, we would probably use the term of two-spirited women. So there's three stories of these Ninawakitsi, manly-hearted women, that I would like to share. And, you know, I'm going to share the stories of their accomplished feats and their successes in war and horse raids, and how they were admired by the Blackfoot people. They are revered and remembered for their fearlessness and courage, and their stories have been passed down through the generations. So the first one is Running Eagle, and I'm going to have a sip of tea. Okay, so Running Eagle grew up, in the southern, with the southern tribes. The southern tribes known as the Blackfeet, and so as a young girl, her name was Brown Weasel Woman, and so that that's the tribe that she grew up, probably in the Montana area today, as we would know. And so as a young woman, she wanted to learn the ways of a warrior, and she would follow the men around, her father around, to learn, the ways of being a warrior. And she gave up the work of, working of household with, and helping her mother. And because she wanted to learn how to hunt and hunt buffalo with her father. And during one of these buffalo hunts, the group of hunters encountered an enemy war party, and her father was part of this buffalo hunt, and then they had encountered an enemy war party, and so they retreated. They ran from the enemy war party to escape them, and her father's horse was shot from under him, and of course fell, and he was injured, and so at that time her name was Brown Weasel Woman. She was also there at this during this buffalo hunt, and she saw that her father had the horse had fallen, and he was injured. And so what she did, Brown Weasel Woman did, was she turned back, and she ran back even though there was enemy fire or whatever was going on, and she picked up her father, and she was from the ground, and she was able to escape. And so this was considered one of the bravest deeds a warrior could perform, was to face the enemy while riding back to rescue someone who was left behind. So that was one of the very first courageous acts that she did. And then her first war adventure was against the Crows, who were a traditional tribal enemy with the Blackfoot. And so her first adventure was she went on a horse raiding party, and the Crows had stolen some horses from them, some Blackfeet horses. And so she went on this first war adventure, and to go back and retrieve those horses from the Crow, and which she did successfully. And then her second adventure was against the Flathead, who live across the mountains. And she went on, this is another horse raiding trip, and they captured over her and her party, her war party, captured over 600 horses. And she was shot at when they were retreating, and 2 arrows struck her shield, but she was not injured. And then during the summer, during the big camp of Akukatsin, I'm going to say, when all the Blackfeet gathered to visit and celebrate with each other, Brown Weasel Woman was asked to get up with all the other warriors and tell the people about her adventures. She was one of the very few women to go on war parties and hunt buffalo, so the people were excited to hear her stories. And they applauded loudly after hearing her tell her stories. Then Lone Walker, the head chief, honored her in a way that was never done before for a woman. He gave her a new name, Running Eagle, Bidomaka. I hope I'm saying that right. A name carried by several famous warriors before her. And then there's another story that I came across of that same event. And then there was an old medicine woman called Weasel, and told her to tell of her performances of what happened at the Flathead camp, about going twice among the enemy lodges and taking 6 horses. And of course the Blackfeet shouted approval at that. And then the medicine man gave her a name, Bidamahkan, and which is a great warrior name. So those are the 2 stories that I've come across. So then her name became Running Eagle, Bidamahka, and it's a man's name, and it was a high and unique honor for a woman to be allowed to carry a warrior's name. So they say that in fact, this woman is said to be the only woman of the tribe honored by being given a man's name. She died about 1836, but her name and her history were long known. She was distinguished as a warrior and showed the most extraordinary bravery. And she was made a warrior chief and led expeditions, with men, to these horse raids or buffalo hunts. And she became so well known with her skills, her warrior skills, that other warriors, other male warriors begged to go along with her, because they knew that she was always successful with her horse raids and with her war expeditions. And so they would beg her to go with them. And if they did get chosen, that meant that they were exceptional warriors, because she only chose the best to go with her. So on the war path, she dressed like a man, and, in her finery, in her warrior finery. But at home, she dressed, like a woman, and she was very modest. And like I mentioned earlier, her fate came when she led a party against the Flatheads near the Sun River, which is near Great Falls, Montana. And while she and her men were in the large enemy camp, the Flathead cornered her and attacked it, and she was clubbed from behind and killed along with 5 of her warriors. So she became known as one of the greatest warriors of the Blackfoot, and her legacy is celebrated. And I believe there's a waterfall in Glacier National Park that's named after her. Okay, and the second manly-hearted woman, Ninawaki, that I'm going to talk about is Revenge Walker. And I can't say her name, her Blackfoot name. Wow, was the half-sister of Red Crow, Chief Red Crow. So she was the half-sister of Red Crow. And so what she was known for was that she was politically active and in her and socially engaged in her community. And she's very influential because she is the half sister of Red Crow. She married during the whiskey fur trade, Fort Whoop-Up. She married a whiskey trader by the name of Donald W. Davis. And so she married this Napiguan, this whiskey trader by the name of Davis, and she was married to him from 1873 to 1886. So this is around the time of, remember that Treaty 7 was signed in 1877. So it's around that time, that transition from being nomadic to being put on a reserve and, signing those treaties. And so this being married to Davis gave her, an alliance is created between Davis and the Blood people. And so this gave him considerable trade and advantage with the Blood people. And his marriage to her it did help his career. And they had 4 children during this time together. And so they were married for a few years. And then, in those days, the marriage between white and Native women was, they were called country marriages. And they were frowned upon. They were increasingly frowned upon in the late 1880s. And Davis, not being not being the best person that he was, left Revenge Walker for a white woman. And then so Revenge Walker left and moved back to the Kainai Reserve and married a man by the name of Fallen Over a Bank. And but the Blood people remembered her as a Ninawaki, as a manly-hearted woman. She could ride like a man and will go into battle as courageous as any of the Blood warriors. And during this transitional period, she was able to exert her power and influence. And she was known to, stand up to Red Crow. Like in our family, we have a story about her, and there was a family feud that went on after Red Crow killed his brother, and who was a full brother to Revenge Walker. So there was a sibling feud going on there because of that. But Revenge Walker was known to be assertive, courageous, and very bold, and she stood her ground. And so, and not only as being able to ride like a man and go into battle as courageous as any man, she was able to hold her own and was considered as a manly-hearted woman. Okay, so the next story that I'm going to talk, the next manly-hearted woman warrior that I'm going to talk about is Miss Alexandra Culbertson. Ni Atuyi Iksinaki. I can't pronounce that right, but Holy Snake Woman. She was from the Blood. She was a Blood Indian from the Blood tribe, and her father was known as Two Sons, or father of many children, or son old man. So she was probably born around 1824, and in the early 1800s. She was an aunt to Chief Red Crow, and she was married to Alexander Culbertson, who was a chief trader for the Upper Missouri outfit of the American company in the early 1840s. In those days, because of the intense competition between the American and British traders for the Blackfoot trade, it was common for officers to marry the daughters of chiefs to cement trade and relations. The stories that we hear, that we have heard of her, like in our family, because that would be my mother's great aunt, this Holy Snake woman. And one of the stories that the stories that I remember being told was that she was a very beautiful young lady, and Alexander Culbertson had seen her come with her father to Fort Benton to trade, and that's when he first saw her. And he approached two sons to see if he could marry her. And he had some requests, some demands before he could marry her. And so, the marriage didn't happen right away until he was able to accomplish these requests. Then two sons then said it would be okay for him to marry her. And so Alexander Culbertson did wait until he was able to meet these requests. And so those are one of the stories that I was told of her. And so they did get married in the early 1840s. And so there's some documentations about her and, how they describe her. There was a naturalist in 1843 by the name of John James Dubon, who had met her and Holy Snake Woman at Fort Union in North Dakota. And when he saw her, he referred to her as an Indian princess possessed of strength and grace in a marked degree. And then 8 years later, there was a Swiss artist by the name of Rudolf Friedrich Kurz, who described her as one of those most beautiful Indian women. She would be an excellent model for a Venus. So this is around the time when the American government was making treaties with the Plains Indian tribes. And she was married to Alexander Culbertson, and she became a skilled negotiator. She would help her husband approach the different tribes and negotiating for the government. And so in 1854, she accompanied a party of United States government negotiators and led by her husband, Alexander Culbertson. And what she said to her husband was, I'm afraid that if the whites do, and the white, her people and the whites do not understand each other, she said, I will go and I will explain things to them. And so she was able to help these negotiations, and then a treaty was signed a year later. I want to say Fort Laramie or treaty, but no, I'm not going to guess the treaty, but it was signed a year later. And so in 1858, after they made quite a fortune, this Alexander Culbertson, after he made quite a fortune with the fur trade, he bought an estate near Peoria, Illinois. And so he brought the Holy Snake Woman there, and they formalized their marriage there in a Catholic service. And during their years together, they had 5 children. And this Alexander Culbertson was quite the drinker and the gambler. So by 1868, their wealth had been gone, and they moved back to Fort Benton, and because he wanted to continue trading. But sometime after that, Holy Snake Woman went to the blood camps. She went home, and she never returned to her husband. And she lived with her her nephew Red Crow, and then she was also became a wife of Henry Alfred Canus, and then she left him also, and then she went to go live with Red Crow's son, Chief Moon. And so her nephew, or Chief Moon, who was my grandfather, took care of her in her last years, and she died in 1893, and while living on the blood reserve. But here again, we have another woman that was fearless and courageous, and not only being that, but she crossed cultures. You know, she was able to cross cultures and be able to live in two worlds. And there's so many stories of her, you know. One I remember of her beauty and her style. She would come home to to her blood people, and the women would surround her, and they would admire her clothes because she would dress so nice. She'd have beautiful dresses, but underneath she would still wear her moccasins. So these are some of the stories that I've heard of her. So she came back, you know, she came back. So, she was really respected among our people for the courageous life she led, and being able to go between cultures, across cultures, and be able to help her people in the treaty negotiations. So today we have women who could be considered warrior women, manly-hearted women, and they are the trailblazers. And again, you know, those who have crossed cultures to achieve their goals, the tenacious ones who have marched on despite racism, marginalization, and colonizations. Here on the blood trial, with the Blackfoot Confederacy, we have many who are educated with their PhDs. We have Dr. Deb Pace, Dr. Martha Minigray Horses, Dr. Clarice Beebe, Dr. Betty Bastine, Dr. Esther Telfeathers, Dr. Vivian Ayaman, Dr. Linda Miniguns, Dr. Genevieve Fox, Dr. Lana Potts, Dr. Terry Lynn Fox, and many others. And, you know, this is just people that I could think of at the top of my head right now. And then we have so many women who have their masters. There's too many to mention. The Blackfoot are considered, you know, one of the tribes that have the highest rates of educated members. You know, medical doctors, lawyers, educators, business professionals, scientists, and so forth. And then we have our extraordinary women who have accomplished, and like the manly-hearted women, who have stood fearlessly for what they believe in, and courageously have accomplished, you know, what they seek out to accomplish. We have Lauren Crazy Bull, who is an outstanding artist, who is also an activist for murdered and missing women. She's won many awards with her artwork, and in residence artists positions. And then we have environmental activists who stood for the land and environment. Lois Frank, Jill Crophead Wolf, and Ella Telfeathers, who were jailed and charged for taking a stand against fracking on the blood reserve. Lois Frank was awarded by Council of Canadians for her courage fighting fracking. And then we have another young lady by the name of Jill Morris Birchie from the Blood Tribe, who has an outstanding record as an athlete. And there's too many to mention, but there's many that are fearless with their endeavors, and we can call those our contemporary manly-hearted women. And you know, we have so many young women that are up and coming that could easily fit into this category. So we can say that our ancestors, our Blackfoot women, who were manly-hearted women, would consider initiating them into their circle. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about the contemporary issues of the Blackfoot women, how the roles have changed, and some of the issues and how it is like, today to be a Blackfoot woman. So today, Blackfoot women have overcome the atrocities and are still struggling with social issues inflicted from colonization. However, the resiliency of Blackfoot women remain, and many are overcoming and still standing strong. Many credits are attributed to our strong Blackfoot grandmothers who have stood with strong hearts to remain the backbone of the family, communities, and nations. With colonization, First Nation belief systems came under assault. Family and cultural systems were disrupted. First Nation women's roles were altered drastically by this assault. No longer were they the center of the society. Instead, they were marginalized by the systems of governance. Historically, First Nation women were politically, economically, and socially powerful. They had a say as to when to go to war and make key decisions in food security and in who would be and they made decisions with clan leadership. The Indian Act did not recognize women as being Indian. Only through their fathers or their husbands did they gain status as an Indian. In 1985, First Nations women challenged this discriminating legislation. This brought about important changes for First Nation women, more specifically to have status and to be recognized as being Indian within the Indian Act. Through discriminatory legislations and strategies denying Aboriginal women or First Nation women full rights and citizenships, Aboriginal women were marginalized by their nations and by the federal government. The Act limited social and political rights for Indigenous women and put Indigenous men in positions of power. In 1951, the Act further damaged the rights of women by not allowing them to vote in band elections. If a man enfranchised, the wife and children were automatically enfranchised as well. If a woman married from another tribe, then she would have to become a member of the other tribe. And then in 1982, with the fight of some brave Indigenous women, changes were made to the Indian Act. Women gained rights to vote and run in tribal elections. Their rights were rectified and they gained their status back. So I'm going to talk today about murdered and missing Indigenous women and children. Indigenous women and girls in Canada are disproportionately affected by all forms of violence. Although the Indigenous women only make up 4% of Canada's female population, 16% of all women murdered in Canada between 1980 and 2012 were Indigenous. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police's 2014 Missing and Murdered Aboriginal Women identified a total of 1,181 missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. The RCMP's operational overview also found that while homicide rates for non-Indigenous women in Canada are declining, the homicide rate for Indigenous women has remained unchanged. Numerous other reports and studies on violence towards Indigenous women in Canada have been identified underlying causes such as social economic factors like poverty and homelessness, as well as historic factors like racism, sexism, and a legacy from colonization and devastation caused by residential school system. So we have these issues, these ongoing issues, but yet, despite the tragedies inflicted, we still remain strong. Our women are still becoming educated, and we are outnumbering the men with educational degrees, and we still are struggling to remain the backbone of our families, our communities, and our nations. And we continue to hold on to traditions and customs and spirituality so that generations ahead and our younger sisters, our nieces, our children, our daughters, that they may learn from our lessons and that they may carry forward with strength like the women before them have done. We Blackfoot women still today are leaders in their communities. We have three on the Blood Tribe. We have three women who are sitting on Blood Tribe Chief and Council. We have grassroots leaders. So it's really the women that are behind, that are holding the community together. And they build programs, they have businesses, they're directors of the different programs on the reserve. So despite the tremendous efforts to bring them down, they are still champions, and they're still standing solid to protect their culture, language, and children. So we still remain, and we're still strong, and we still stand here for our children. Thank you.